I was told that in preparing my talk, I should presume that you don't know anything about Islam. So if this is your case, you're one of several billion people. I would like to teach you today about Islam through its impact upon Christianity. This is a subject that almost no one knows anything about. Indeed, there are many in America who would insist that Islam has never had any impact upon Christianity. So I'm going to assume you know nothing, and we'll go from there. This is an important political question, but it's also a religious question. The land in green is Islamic land. How did this come to be? What is its history? Because this map is not only a political map, it is also a religious map, because much of this land, indeed the majority of it, was originally Christian. This history is not taught hardly anywhere, even in the universities in America. Now then, I am not a historian, but I love to read history. And so I love to ask questions which have never been asked before. Exactly how did this conquest take place? In America, there are roughly 5 battles that Islam fought against Christianity in Europe that are known. Indeed, I doubt there are, if you chose 100 Americans, I doubt there would even be one of you who could name 2 battles. But recently, there's been some translation of ancient documents, and there is the internet. So I asked the question, how many battles has Islam fought against civilization? I compiled a table of 548 battles. There's also been some very interesting results in archaeology under the Mediterranean. So the question then becomes, how do we display this knowledge? Because if I read you a list of all the battles, you would fall asleep. So I created something called a dynamic battle map. Now, here's the way it works. The land in green is Islamic. The white dots are current battles. The red dots are battles in history. We're going to compress 12 centuries of conquest into 2 minutes. Immediately, Islam bursts out of Arabia and starts attacking the rest of the world. You'll notice something very interesting here. Most people, when they think of Islam, think of deserts. But notice how Islam has created a naval force to project power across the Mediterranean. Already, Spain has been conquered, North Africa, and the heart of the Christian world, Damascus, Jerusalem, and Smyrna. Now, one of the things that you need to know is in many of these battles, indeed most of them, Christians are captured and sold into slavery. In Spain, they will fight the Muslims for 700 years. They started attacking Anatolia, Turkey, almost immediately, and as soon as they can conquer Constantinople, Eastern Europe is now being under conquest in the Balkans. Indeed, the high point of conquest came here in Vienna. Indeed, there's a breakfast bread called crescent rolls to celebrate this historical incident. Notice that continued war in Spain has driven the Muslims out of Spain, and that is 548 battles fought against primarily a Christian world. But it is far worse than this looks. I have listed hardly any of the battles in Africa. 80 million Hindus were killed in jihad. They're barely mentioned here. And the destruction of Buddhist civilization in Western Asia was also destroyed and not recorded here. In the 20th century alone, there were 1 million Turkish Armenian Christians killed and 750,000 of the Assyrian Christians. In America, no one knows this. If you're going to explain that part of the world, you need to understand something. Today, when we talk about empires, we think of land mass and we think of continents. But the early Christian world, Roman world, and Greek world were Mediterranean. Egypt was part of the Mediterranean civilization, not African civilization. The reason was it was very easy to connect Alexandria, Egypt, to Rome. It only took 10 days, whereas if you went by land, it took 140 days. Under the Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire, the seas were free of pirates and trade could prosper. In the harbor at Constantinople, there would be as many as 500 ships. All of this changed. Before Islam, if Rome wanted to establish contact with a church in France, it sent the letter by boat. After Islam, they sent the message over the Alps. Ibn Khaldun, the famous Arabic historian, said that the Christians could not float a plank on the inland sea. What would happen? We now know from archaeology under the sea that 90% of the trade on the Mediterranean ceased. What would happen in Vienna if no planes landed, there were no communications, and 90% of the traffic on the roads was gone? What would happen to Viennese civilization? It would become exceedingly poor. Now then, Islam preyed on Christian ships, and every part of the Mediterranean became poor unless it was Muslim. You've all heard of the Dark Ages, I presume. Have you heard of the Dark Ages? How many? Raise your hand again. How many know what the Dark Ages were? It was in the Middle Ages, and there was very little learning and massive poverty. Indeed, in France, in one history of the documents of a certain century, you could not even find the word merchant. Learning ceased. Europe got its paper from Egypt, and it was called papyrus. No papyrus was shipped into Europe during the Dark Ages. What would happen to your world if you didn't have a computer and you didn't have paper? What education would you have? Very little. Anyway, not only did Europe become poor, but North Africa became poor, and what we now call Turkey became exceedingly poor. The conquest in North Africa was so fast, it destroyed civilization and left only buildings standing. If you go to Rome, many of the Roman buildings have been destroyed because during the Dark Ages they used the marble from the ancient Roman buildings for their own purpose. The conquest of North Africa was so fast and so intense that there was no one left to use the buildings that were left from the Romans. The United States has never used this weapon, but they created a bomb called the neutron bomb. Kill people, but not destroy buildings. Islam built their own neutron bombs centuries ago. Something else happened. In the archaeology under the sea, there's a layer of silt on the ocean bottom in the Mediterranean. This came about because the invading Muslims destroyed the irrigation system of the Christians. Not only did they destroy the irrigation system, they were herders, not farmers. And the Muslims turned their goats and sheep onto the Christian crops and ate the fields, and there was erosion. So civilization, Christian civilization, was basically annihilated. Now then, what did Christian Europeans do for money? Because we've already established they didn't have easy transportation and no communication. The sophisticated civilization of the Romans and the Greeks was reduced to primitive trade. The previous proud culture of the Romans and Greeks sold crude products like fur, lumber, swords, and slaves. So this conquest had enormous economic effects and political effects, and as we will see, it had religious effects. The history that is taught in universities said that the Roman Empire fell because of the German invading tribes and had nothing to do with Islam. Indeed, they go further and say that Islam was a blessing because it retained some of the Greek learning. I say that the data teaches us that classical civilization was destroyed by jihad and replaced by a Islamic civilization. Christianity was forever changed. Now then, one of the things that we hear, I keep saying the word in America because I do not know what is in Europe, but in America we're taught that the Crusades were a terrible evil, that the Muslims may have been bad, but the Christians were worse. Well, let's take a look at this using data. In the year 1100, the Patriarch of Constantinople sent a desperate request to the Pope to send armed help. This is the world through the Pope's eyes in the year 1100. The green is where Islam is conquered, and all of the red dots are battles that were lost by Christians. So now what I want to do is to do the same battle map that we did before, but for the Crusades, except we're going to have white crosses that age to red crosses. Instead of round dots, we have crosses, red and white. I show you the two battle maps. The upper one is the Crusades, which is a defensive war that lasted for 300 years, and it ended 800 years ago. Whereas today, the jihad has gone on for 1,400 years, and somewhere in the world, someone died because they were not a Muslim. So, my point is this. The Crusades were not the moral equivalent of jihad. There's another story that's told in America about how wonderful the civilization of Baghdad. We're told it was the golden age of humanity. Indeed, I was told by a history professor at Princeton University that the Baghdad golden age was the high point of all human history. But let's stop and take a look at this. I need to introduce you to a word called dhimmi, D-H-I-M-M-I. D-H-I-M, well, you would spell it the same way.
D-H-I-M-E-S.
It's an Arabic word, and what it does is it is a person who is a Christian who's been conquered by Islam, and these are the terms it has to live under. A Christian in a Muslim world was a third-rate, they're not even a citizen, but subject. Christian women were used as sex slaves in the harems. In the conquest of Spain, there was a standing purchase order for 3,000 blonde virgin Christians to be shipped to Baghdad every year. Now then, by the way, this is not, in my mind, a golden age. There are two scientists, at least in the room, Solomon and myself, and our whole field of knowledge is based upon cause and effect and laws of nature. If there is no cause and effect, and there are no laws of nature, there is no science. That is all we teach, that in experimental learning. But Islam denies cause and effect. Islam denies laws of nature. This is poison for the human mind. Indeed, it is like a lobotomy of the human mind. Now then, the claim is made that Islam preserved all the learning of the Greeks and Romans. But Islam destroyed 90% of this learning. The knowledge that was left had to be kept in Christian monasteries. And you hear a lot about translation work. Well, it turns out, how could a lot of Arabs coming from illiteracy do the translation work of the Greeks and Romans? The vast majority of all this translation work was done by Christian scholars. We also hear in America that in Baghdad Golden Age there was wonderful medical care. They don't tell you that it was in Christian hospitals. The Golden Age of Baghdad is a myth. But in America, it's a very popular myth that is taught in the schools. The jihad I've talked to you about ended 200 years ago. Let's deal with more jihad. This is an example of a database of attacks by jihadists. Here's a plot of the jihad since 2001 up to the year 2011. The red is the total number of jihad killings. The green is jihad against fellow Muslims. This is what we see in Iraq today with Islamic State. They kill the Shia, and they also kill the modern educated Sunni Muslim. The yellow is the killing of kafirs. Kafir is an Arabic word, usually translated as infidel. This is not the correct translation. The word kafir, K-A-F-I-R, really cannot be translated. It is the worst word in any human language. It's the word they use in the Quran, the Hadith. So kafir, I'm a kafir. I presume all of you are kafirs. That's the correct word. Okay. Now then, what do we notice about jihad? It is relentless. It started in Muhammad's lifetime. Kafirs and what I would call impure Muslims are the victims. Jihad can adapt, but it will always be with us. In America, we're told that Islamic State and other such things are our fault. I want to show to you that jihad is as Islamic as you can possibly be. Jihad comes with inside of Islam. Now then, one more thing about jihad. I took here and made a bar chart of the most attacks against a civilization. Actually, I chose the top 4. So it's Israel, Thailand, Philippines, and India. Now let me read this list to you another way. It's against the Jews, the Buddhists, the Christians, the Hindus, the secularists, all kafir. In America, there are atheists who say, oh, Islam has nothing to do with me. I don't care about religion. Little do they know that in Islam, they are the lowest of the low. They're worse than a Jew. Now then, in America, I keep saying that because I know America, Islam is called the religion of peace. This was introduced in American culture by President George Bush. If you go through history, you will find that there are 12 decades and 1,400 years that are free of jihad. So the history of Islam is 91% jihad and 9% peace. I'm a retired college professor. And if you make 9% on my test, you receive an F. The presidents and the media in the United States get an F. Now then, if you have something happening that goes on for 14 centuries, something is causing it. This cannot be an accident, nor can it be caused by anybody else. The next part I want to show you that jihad comes from within Islam, and it is the success of Islam. All right. Everyone's heard of the Quran. Everyone's heard of the Quran, right? Everyone? Okay. How many of you think that that is the holy text of Islam? If you say that, you get 14%. That's an F. Now, it turns out that the Quran, you cannot be a Muslim by just the Quran alone. There's not enough information in it. But there are 91 verses which proclaim that Muhammad is the perfect human being, and that everyone must be a husband like Muhammad, do everything that he did, no matter how he ate, whatever he did, you must imitate him. And where do we find Muhammad? Well, we have his biography of 800 pages, and we have his hadith, his traditions. There are many collections of these, usually having about 6,000 to 7,000. A hadith is something that Muhammad did or said, things down to as small as how he drank a glass of water, which he would never do what I did because he never drank standing up. I do not drink like Muhammad. Okay, so now then, let's go back and ask the question, where is Islam? It's 14% Allah and 86% Muhammad. This is good news if you're a student, because you don't have to understand the Quran at all. You just need to understand Muhammad. It's like reading a biography. So, this much Allah, this much Muhammad, so therefore it is easy to know Islam. Keep this in mind, because it will turn out that there is a burden placed upon the Christian today, which is the conversion of Muslims. And the secret of doing this is Muhammad, not Allah. Okay, there's that word again, kafir. I have read religious doctrine all of my life. I've studied Torah at the synagogue. I've studied Hinduism with Hindu masters. I've studied Buddhism under Buddhist teachers. And when I read the doctrine of Islam, one thing stood out. Most of Islam is about you and me. So I asked myself, why is this? And I also took and measured how much of Islamic doctrine is about the kafir. Nearly 2/3 of the Quran is about the kafir. Isn't that strange? You would think it would be about how to be a Muslim. When you read the Buddha's teachings, they're about how to be a Buddha, how to be a Buddhist. So this is very unusual. Nearly 2/3 of the Quran is about the kafir. 81% of Muhammad's life deals with his war against the kafir. 37% of the hadith are about the kafir. So overall, out of these 3 books, 51% of it is about you and me. And every word about the kafir is terrible. Now then, Islam, as I say, is sometimes called the religion of peace. Let's explain that. There are 2 different Qurans. An early Quran written in Mecca, a latter Quran written in Medina. In Mecca, Muhammad preached the religion of Islam for 13 years and persuaded 150 Arabs to become Muslims. He had to leave Mecca at the insistence of the Meccans. He went to Medina, where he became a politician and a jihadist. When he died, every Arab was a Muslim. The religion of peace was a failure. Politics of jihad was an overwhelming success. Now then, when you hear verses in America, there's something very popular called interfaith dialogue. And you hear quotes from the Quran. You have your religion, I have mine. Let there be no compulsion in religion. So the early Quran is religious and peaceful. The latter Quran is about jihad and success. Now then, here we have Muhammad's career. Not only have I been a professor, I've also been a businessman. And a businessman keeps up with his sales. This is the sales career of Muhammad. And it's basically what I told you. In Mecca, it was religion, it was peaceful, but 150 people joined in 13 years. This is not success. What made Islam successful? Politics and jihad. What makes Islam successful today? Jihad. And politics. And it has nothing to do what the policy is of Germany, Vienna, America, England, nothing. So it does not make any difference what Europe's foreign policy is. Matters not. Jihad is successful. Now then, let me tell you there are 4 kinds of jihad. There's jihad of the sword, jihad of the mouth, jihad of writing, and jihad of money. These are more successful than jihad of the sword. If it were not for the jihad of the sword, the other 3 jihads would work. I want to talk to you about what I call the law of Islamic saturation. If you remember on the battle map, Turkey, which used to be Asia Minor or Anatolia, was conquered. Turkey used to be a Christian nation. I say this so emphatically because most people do not know this. So, when Islam invaded in 1300, the yellow point was it was all 100% Christian. But if I ask you today, is Turkey Christian or Muslim, what will you say? Muslim. What happened? Notice at the bottom of this graph, it's measured in centuries. It took centuries for this to happen, but Christianity is almost completely annihilated in Turkey. Why does this happen? And there are verses in the Quran and in the Hadith traditions which say, war shall be waged against the kafir until every human being says there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. And you say, well, this could not happen in Europe today. It is happening in Europe today. The law of Islamic saturation means that the Sharia will be applied more and more. As this curve predicts, there will come a day in which Christianity is of no force whatsoever, nor is Western civilization of force. It will all be Sharia. And you say, well, this can't happen. Remember, Afghanistan used to be Buddhist. Pakistan used to be Hindu. North Africa was Christian. All of this has taken place. It just takes time. So I call this the law of Islamic saturation. And you say, we're nice people. They won't do that. Do you think the Byzantine Christians were bad people or something? Are you better than them? Are you smarter than them? Do you have better morals than them? Do you understand the Bible better than them? How are you special? You're kafir. One of the things that puzzles me about my study of Islam, remember, I'm not a historian, I'm a scientist. But scientists like to form questions. So I ask this question. How many people have died in jihad? Is this a reasonable question? Very reasonable. Why am I the first person who's ever asked this question in 1,400 years? I will tell you. People do not want to know. Indeed, in America, people are desperate to not know. If you tell them facts, they will call you a bigot. But these are facts. Facts mean less and less in the modern time. What counts is feelings. This makes people feel bad, so they don't want to know it. Why does Islam do what it does? Because it is Islamic. The true nature of political Islam is found in the action of Muslims. And I forgot to define a term for you. What is Islam? Islam is the doctrine found in the Quran, the Sirah, and the Hadith. Political Islam is the part of Islam that deals with the kafir. I'm only interested in the part of Islam that impacts me. This seems reasonable to myself. Should it not be the same for you? I do not care anything one way or the other about the religion of Islam. I don't care if a Muslim prays 5 times a day or 1 time a day. I don't care if they pray facing Mecca or Macedonia. I don't care. I do care about how they treat me and people like me. What counts is political Islam, not religious Islam. Now then, some people say, well, Islam just needs a reformation. Are you going to change the Quran? Are you going to change Muhammad? You cannot change those. They are permanent and eternal. We've already had reform movements in the world today. Al-Qaeda was reform. Taliban was reform. Boko Haram was reform. Islamic State is reform. Taliban, okay. They're all Islamic reform movements. And who asked for the reform of Islam? Kafirs. They want it to change. Islam does not change. So Islam is Islam. Now then, Christianity has been changed by 3 major events in history. Rome adopting Christianity as a state religion, the impact of Islam upon Christianity, and the Reformation in Germany. Islam subjugated the very heart of Christianity and annihilated different forms of Christianity. There are forms of Christianity that are disappeared off the face of the earth, including other religions like Zoroastrianism. Here's what Islam did. It annihilated central government by collapsing the Byzantine Empire and the Roman Empire. The Catholic Church was forever changed because it became the only institution that was international in Europe. It was left being the only people who knew how to read and write and to teach schools. So the Catholic Church was in the business not only of being a religion, but being a political unit. Now then, I'm going to take you through several points. The Greek Orthodox Church believed in religious icons. They were losing in battle to Islam, and so they said, Islam does not have images, so we'll give up images. The knowledge about witches and whatnot came from Islam. The Europeans learned about witches and black magic from the Spaniards, the Muslim Spaniards in Spain. And in 1487, the Catholic Church released its book against witches called The Witch's Hammer. The first mass killing of Jews on the face of the earth for religious reasons was in the year 624 by Muhammad. In 1011 in Spain, there was mass murder of Jews, mass murder in 1033, and then in 1096 was the first Christian mass murder of Jews. The doctrine of war was created by Islam in the year 623, and only in the year 1063 did the Catholic doctrine of holy war be produced. This was in response to Islam. Apostasy and heresy were crimes in the 7th century in Islam, and they became crimes in the 12th century by the Catholic Church. The Inquisition first occurred in Spain in the early 12th century. The Catholic Inquisition, which was based on trying to find out who was a secret Muslim, occurred in the latter part of the 12th century. My conclusion is that Islam influenced a desperate and losing church in Europe. I maintain that the fanaticism of the Catholic Church was learned directly from the Muslims. So I'm going to stop my lecture here, but remember, what I've tried to teach you today is simple. Islam has had a major impact upon world history and European history in particular. This history has been so painful that it has been suppressed. The most frequent question I'm asked by people who know nothing about Islam, they think is, aren't you afraid, Bill? When I studied my study of Buddhism and Hinduism, no one said to me, aren't you afraid? There's a reason for such questions. Now then, I want to close with this. In Christianity, there's something called the Great Commission. Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel. I maintain that that world includes the Islamic world. But to do this, you need to know Islam. But remember, I've given you the secret key. Forget about Allah, study Muhammad. There's nothing in his life that you cannot understand. Nothing. So therefore, if Christianity is to survive, and if European civilization is to survive, and that includes the atheist, the Buddhist, the whatevers, the church must shoulder its burden, study Muhammad, and learn how to take the Great Commission to the Muslim. Now then, one last point. I already said this was last, but I'll give you one more. I noticed that some of you are taking notes. If you will take a business card from me and send me an email, I will send you this PowerPoint presentation so you can study it on your own. As we Americans say, deal? Thank you for your time.